All right. Buckle up, everyone. We're diving deep into something that, kind of impacts all of us, right? U.S. tax policy and how it all ties into that big old national debt we keep hearing about.
Yeah, it looks like someone threw a whole mountain of info our way this time, huh?
You said it. We got an interview with Jessica Real Freakonomics Radio, and then someone really took the time to write up a whole response to that interview too. So what's the plan? I'm thinking we gotta bust some tax myths. Those things are everywhere.
Definitely. Gotta lay bare some hard truths about how the government's spending our money too.
Right. And then the big question, is there any hope we can actually fix this mess? Or are we all doomed?
We'll see. But first, I want to throw this out there, just something to think about. You ever heard the idea that the U.S. middle class, regular folks, they might actually be paying less in taxes than people over in Europe?
Really? That's kind of wild if it's true.
It is one of the things that really jumps out from Riedel's analysis, yeah. And what I find fascinating is that, both sides, left and right, they each have their own little collection of myths about taxes. Like, firmly believe them.
Uh-huh. So we're all kind of blinded by what? Our own biases?
You could say that. And the thing is, while we're all busy arguing about these myths, the real problem just keeps getting bigger. It's the government spending. It's out of control.
Okay, so let's back up for a sec. Who is this Jessica Riedel, and why should we care what she thinks?
Riedel. She's an economist. She's advised both sides, Republicans and Democrats. So she's not really coming at this from a partisan angle, Data driven. That's what she says. And she's not afraid to speak her mind. Even got herself banned from the Bush White House once.
Banned? Seriously? What? She criticized the president or something?
She did, yeah. Oh. Criticized their spending. Yeah. So, she's definitely got strong convictions.
Okay, so she's not afraid to ruffle some feathers. I can dig it. What's this main point she's making about taxes?
Well, her argument is that both liberals and conservatives, they kind of fall into this trap. She calls it Dunning-Krugering up and down. Basically means we think we know way more than we actually do about complicated stuff like taxes.
Ah, so everyone thinks they're the tax expert, huh?
Exactly. And that's how all these myths get started.
Okay, so spill the beans. What are some of these tax myths? Let's start with the conservative side. What are they getting wrong?
All right, so on the right, you've got this whole idea that tax cuts, they magically pay for themselves.
Like some kind of economic miracle.
Right. And then they've got this other idea, the starve the beast thing. Mm. Basically, if you cut taxes enough, the government's forced to cut spending too. No money left, right.
That's an interesting theory.
It's a theory for sure, but not one that really holds up when you look at the data.
Okay, so what about the liberal side? What myths are they buying into?
Well, there's this big one, that the middle class is shouldering the biggest tax burden.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
You do. And then there's the whole corporations and the wealthy aren't paying their fair share thing.
Right. Got to make those billionaires pay.
And the last one, this idea that if we just jack up taxes on the rich, that'll magically solve the deficit.
But Riedel says all that's wrong. Like none of it's true.
She does, yeah. And she's got the data to back it up. One example. She points out that once you factor in all the deductions and credits, the bottom 40% of earners, people making the least, they actually end up with a negative income tax rate.
Wait, a negative rate? So they're getting money back from the government.
Exactly. Imagine someone working part-time, maybe a low income.
Yeah.
Right. They've got kids. You factor in tax credits for children for earned income, and boom, they might get more money back than they actually paid in.
So the idea that they're carrying this huge tax burden, that's totally off base then.
Yep. Completely flips the script.
This is pretty eye-opening stuff. I gotta admit, I never really thought about it like that.
That's what makes Riedel's analysis so interesting, I think. Challenges a lot of assumptions. And if we take a step back, look at the whole picture, the data actually shows the U.S. tax system is pretty progressive already. Even more so than some European countries.
So all this talk about, taxing the rich to fix everything, that's not the whole story.
Not even close. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay, so if it's not all about these tax myths, what's the real villain here? What's really driving this national debt thing?
Riedel is very clear about this. It's the spending. Government spending, and it's out of control. And that's where things get a little scary.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me the scary part.
Just Social Security and Medicare. Just those two programs, they're projected to be short, get this, $124 trillion over the next 30 years.
Whoa. Back up. Did you say $124 trillion? That's like, I can't even imagine that kind of money.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Yeah. And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
Even if we snapped our fingers, fixed all our tax problems overnight, poof, gone. This giant wave of spending, it's still going to be there.
So we're basically talking about a tidal wave of spending that's going to swamp us no matter what we do with taxes.
That's a pretty good way to put it. Yeah.
Okay.
It really puts into perspective just how huge of a problem this is.
Okay. $124 trillion. That's, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that number. But you mentioned that Riedl's interview, it got a pretty strong response. What were people saying? What was the pushback?
A lot of folks thought she was missing the point, you know? They said we get so caught up in all these symptoms, the deficits, the debt, the finger pointing between Democrats and Republicans, that we forget to look at the root cause.
So what are they saying the root cause is? What did this response say?
They said it's our education system. They made a pretty bold statement. They said it's stuck in this 125-year-old factory model, just churning out obedient workers instead of people who can actually think for themselves, you know, people who can actually understand the world.
Okay. So they're saying our schools aren't teaching us how to handle money, even on a national level.
Yeah, that's the argument. They're saying we focus so much on memorizing facts and taking standardized tests that we don't really teach people how to deal with complicated systems.
And I guess there's not many systems more complicated than taxes and spending and all that.
Right. How can you expect people to make good decisions about all this stuff if they don't even understand the basics, you know?
So instead of learning things in these neat little boxes like math class, history class, we should be teaching kids how to, connect the dots.
Exactly. The response, it argues that we don't teach those critical thinking skills. So how can we be surprised when people can't make informed choices about these big issues? It's like giving someone a car, but not teaching them how to drive.
Yeah, you're just asking for trouble with that, for sure. So what they're saying is it's not just about the economics, it's about giving people the mental tools to really participate in the conversation, right?
Right. So this goes back to what Riedl was saying about young people being the ones to maybe turn things around, right? I mean, they're the ones inheriting this mess.
Yeah. But if they're coming out of a system that's not preparing them, how can we expect them to fix it?
Exactly. It's kind of a vicious cycle.
So are we saying fixing education equals fixing the economy? Is that the takeaway here?
I wouldn't say it's that simple. But I think this response makes a good point, you know? A strong economy, a stable fiscal future, it depends on having citizens who can understand and engage with these issues.
So it's got to be more than just sound bites and slogans. We got to be willing to really dig into the nitty gritty.
Absolutely. It's about having real conversations, questioning what we think we know, and finding solutions that actually work for everyone, not just the special interest, right?
Speaking of special interests, Riedl's thing, it was all about those big programs, right? Social Security, Medicare. But this response, it's got me thinking about lobbyists. How much do they influence the way the government spends money?
That's a great point. It's something a lot of people don't think about. And that leads us to this idea of crony capitalism. It's what the response to Riedl is talking about.
Crony capitalism, that sounds kind of shady.
It can be. Basically, it means you have businesses, wealthy individuals, and they use their political power to get favors from the government.
Favors? Give me some examples.
Think subsidies, tax breaks, loopholes and regulations, all kinds of stuff that gives them an edge over everyone else.
So it's like the game is rigged.
That's one way to look at it. And the response to Riedl, they argued that this crony capitalism is a huge part of our financial problems.
How so? How does it hurt the country as a whole?
Well, it distorts the market. It kills competition. And in the end, it costs taxpayers a ton of money.
Can you give me some real world examples? How does this crony capitalism actually play out?
Sure. Let's look at healthcare. You've got all these policies that prevent competition between states, right? So what happens? The price of insurance, the price of healthcare, it just keeps going up. And then there's prescription drugs. They cost so much because the pharmaceutical industry, they've got so much power, so much influence, they can pretty much charge whatever they want.
What about military spending? I always hear that's a big chunk of the budget.
That's a classic example. We spend more on defense than anyone else, but we end up paying way too much for weapon systems that are years behind schedule and way over budget.
So crony capitalism, it not only messes up the economy, it also leads to this crazy spending that keeps adding to the national debt.
Exactly. It's a systemic problem. It rewards people for having connections, instead of rewarding actual skill or hard work. And it makes it really hard to make smart decisions about how to spend money.
So what we've got is like a perfect storm brewing, huh? An education system that's outdated, this crony capitalism thing running wild, and then, of course, our lovely political climate where everyone's just worried about the next election, not the long-term future.
It's not a pretty picture.
Yeah.
But the first step is just acknowledging these problems, seeing how they're all connected.
Okay, so now I'm feeling a little depressed. We've talked about all these problems, but what about solutions? Is there any way out of this mess?
The response to Riedel, they pointed to a few things.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are they?
Well, they said we need big changes, real reform, both in education and in our political system. For education, we need to teach kids the skills they'll actually need in the real world, not the same stuff we were learning like 100 years ago.
That's what we were just talking about, right? The critical thinking, analyzing systems, all that. But how do we actually make that happen? How do we actually change the education system?
It's a big challenge, but it starts with changing our mindset, We got to be willing to try new things, to adapt to the world as it is now, not how it used to be. It's not just about teaching facts. It's about teaching kids to be flexible, to solve problems, to love learning,
Okay, I'm with you on the education thing.
Yeah.
But what about politics? How do we get past all the gridlock, all the fighting, and get our leaders to actually care about the future?
That is the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at history, you see that big changes often happen when there's a crisis, like the Great Depression. That led to the New Deal. It completely changed how the government was involved in the economy.
So are you saying we need some kind of big shakeup, something to wake everybody up and make them face reality?
Maybe. But it doesn't have to be a disaster, It could be that people start demanding change, a grassroots movement. Or maybe our priorities shift. Or maybe some new leaders come along, people with some vision, some guts, who are willing to do things differently.
Riedel was saying she has some hope that young people might be the ones to make that happen.
Yeah, they could be. Young people, they tend to be more open to new ideas. They're not as stuck in the old ways of doing things. And they can see that the choices we make now, they're going to affect them for the rest of their lives,
But they got to be educated. They got to be involved, right? They got to have the tools to actually make a difference.
Absolutely. And that's where we come in,
Yeah.
The older generation. We got to mentor them, work with them, build a bridge between the generations, share what we know, and build a future that works for everyone.
Okay, I'm feeling a little more hopeful now, but I gotta be honest, it's all a bit overwhelming. Where do we even begin?
Yeah, you start with yourself,
Yeah.
Learn about the issues, talk to people, hold your elected officials accountable.
Sounds like you're putting a lot of faith in personal responsibility.
I am. Remember, this is a democracy. We can't just sit back and watch. We all have to get involved.
So this deep dive, it wasn't just about taxes and debt, was it? It was about seeing the bigger picture, seeing how everything's connected, the education system, the political system, our values, everything.
Exactly. And it was about learning from the past, understanding that we all have a responsibility to make things better.
Okay, we're back. Final stretch of our deep dive into fiscal responsibility.
Whew. We've covered some serious ground here, busted some tax myths, faced the kind of terrifying reality of all that government spending, even made a connection to how we're educating kids. Who would have thought, right? But now, you mentioned we'd get a little historical perspective on all this. You said some other societies have dealt with these same problems. What can we learn from them?
You're right. History's a treasure trove of examples, Nations struggling with debt, political chaos, the whole shebang. And while the details might be different, there are these patterns, these common threads that just keep popping up.
Okay, I'm all for a good history lesson. Give me an example. My memory's a little fuzzy on the ancient world. Let's take ancient Rome, right? At their peak, those guys were the superpower. Incredible infrastructure, a massive military, complex government, the whole 9 yards. But over time, things started to slip. Spending got out of hand. Corruption seeped into the government. People stopped caring about the common good.
So they had their own version of crony capitalism going on.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And it all led to economic instability and, the rest of the story. The Roman Empire, it eventually crumbled.
So even the mighty Romans, they weren't immune to a financial meltdown. Man, that's kind of unsettling.
It is unsettling, isn't it? And it really drives home a crucial point. Even the most powerful empires, they can fall apart if they don't deal with these basic economic and political problems. It's a cautionary tale, no doubt about it.
Okay, ancient Rome, definitely a warning there. But are there any more recent examples? Maybe some societies that actually managed to turn things around?
Got to have some hope, right? Oh, absolutely. Let's jump ahead a few centuries. Think about the U.S. after World War II. The country was in rough shape, huge national debt, tons of veterans coming home, needing jobs, needing housing. The world had been completely turned upside down.
Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, there are some eerie parallels there. But what's amazing is how the U.S. responded. They didn't just throw up their hands and give up. They didn't get stuck in political bickering. They chose innovation. They chose collaboration. They chose investment.
So what did they actually do? What were the concrete steps they took?
They went big on infrastructure, roads, bridges, the whole deal. But they also invested heavily in education and research, things that would pay off in the long run. The GI Bill, that was huge. It gave returning veterans a chance to get an education, buy a house. It helped create a more skilled workforce, gave the economy a real boost. There was this feeling of shared sacrifice, everyone pitching in to rebuild, to make a better future.
So they didn't just try to cut spending or raise taxes. They actually put money into building a better future.
Exactly. And it worked. The post-war period was a time of incredible economic growth and prosperity for the U.S. They pulled themselves out of a deep hole.
Okay, that's a much more optimistic example. But let's be real. The world's a lot different now than it was back in the 1950s. Back then, things were simpler, right? Now we've got all this hyper-partisanship, globalization, technology changing at warp speed. Do those lessons from the past, do they even apply anymore?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Figuring out how to apply those timeless principles, investment, collaboration, long-term thinking, to our modern world.
So what would that look like in practice? Give me some concrete ideas.
Well, first, we got to expand how we think about infrastructure. It's not just about physical things like roads and bridges anymore. It's about investing in people, education, skills training, research and development.
That's exactly what that response to Riedel's interview was saying, right? We got to overhaul the education system.
You got it. We have to give our workforce the skills they need to succeed in this rapidly changing economy. It's about lifelong learning, being adaptable, being able to roll with the punches.
Okay, I'm totally on board with investing in education, but, and I hate to sound like a broken record here, but the politics, it's a mess. How do we get our leaders to put aside their differences and actually focus on these long-term solutions?
I'll be honest, that's the toughest nut to crack. But history shows us that sometimes crisis can be a catalyst for real change. Look at the Great Depression, right? It forced the U.S. to completely rethink the role of government, led to the New Deal and all those programs.
So you're saying we might need a wake-up call, something to shake us out of our complacency and force us to deal with these hard truths?
It's possible.
Yeah,
but it doesn't have to be a disaster. It could be a groundswell of public pressure, people demanding change, maybe a shift in our priorities as a nation. Or maybe, just maybe, we get some new leaders with some real vision, some courage to do what needs to be done.
Riddell seemed to think that young people, they might be the ones to push for that change.
And they just might. They're more open to new ideas, they're less stuck in the old ways of doing things, and they're the ones who are going to have to live with the consequences of our choices,
But they got to be educated, they got to be involved, right? They got to have the tools to actually make a difference.
You're absolutely right. That's where we come in, the older generations. We have a responsibility to mentor them, to work with them, to build a bridge between the generations, share what we know, build a future that works for everyone, right?
Wow, this has been quite the deep dive. We've gone from the nitty-gritty of economics to grand historical sweeps. We've talked about education, about generations, about the future. What are your final thoughts for our listeners out there?
This wasn't just about debunking some myths or crunching numbers about the national debt. It was about understanding the bigger picture, seeing how our fiscal health is tied to everything else, our schools, our political system, even our values as a society. It's all connected.
And we learned that history, it can be both a warning and a source of inspiration. It shows us what can go wrong, but it also shows us that it's possible to turn things around.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, we all have a role to play in building a better future for ourselves, for our kids, for generations to come.
So to our listener out there, we leave you with this. What are you going to do with what you learned today? How are you going to contribute to a more fiscally responsible future? It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, and the future depends on all of us stepping up and doing our part. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
keep learning, keep questioning, keep pushing for positive change. We're all in this together.